Well, hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Ashmit Kumar, and here are the headlines that we're tracking this evening. Bulls claw their way back on the Wall Street. Sensex and Nifty recover half of yesterday's losses as bank stocks lead the recovery. Reliance Industries hits a 4-month high. New public issues continue to hold investor interest. IPOs by Credo brands and Happy Forgings draw to a close with strong subscription numbers. Azad Engineering racks up strong retail investor demand on day 2. Shares of Z Entertainment rebound after it informed stock exchanges that Sony will enter into negotiations to extend the timeline to close the $10 billion merger. The deadline was set to expire today. Sources say the agreement includes a provision to extend the deadline for a month for negotiations in good faith. Parliament clears a bill giving the government the upper hand in selecting the 3-member election commission. Lok Sabha suspends list touches 100 after 3 more MPs were suspended for misconduct. Opposition parties march in protest of the suspensions. Hamas claims at least 20,000 Palestinians have died in Israeli attacks since early October. Uncertainty over a hostage release deal mounts as talks with Hamas and Egypt end without results. The UN Security Council vote calling for a ceasefire is delayed for the 3rd time as the United States is yet to decide on supporting or rejecting the call. Export restrictions on agri products will lead to a $4 to $5 billion decline in exports this year, said the government sources. Indian government has imposed curbs on items like rice, wheat and sugar in a bid to keep domestic prices in check. The chief executives of Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global discuss a potential merger. Both companies try to chart a strategy to fight the might of Apple, Amazon and Netflix in a streaming-dominated world. Diagnostic stocks surge after government issues standard COVID-19 advisory asking states to stay alert against new strands of the virus. However, the government has not made RTPCR tests mandatory, says 93% of cases are home isolated, indicating mild illness, adds that there's been no rise in hospitalization rates. Elon Musk's social media platform X is back online after an hour-long global outage. The platform has suffered several technical snags over the last few months. SRK starrer Dunki sees a strong opening at the box office amidst mixed reviews. PVR Inox stock tanks 3%. The Rajkumar Hirani-directed film will clash with Prabhas starrer Salar, which releases tomorrow. Well, first up, the day's market action. The Wall Street staged a smart recovery intraday to regain half of yesterday's losses. Nifty and Sensex gained over 0.5%. The recovery was led by the banks, with HDFC Bank and SBI leading from the front. Nifty Bank ended close to 1% in the green. The mid-caps continue to outperform, with that index soaring over 1.5%. Well, Inox India, meanwhile, made a strong debut on the Wall Street. Shares of the cryogenic tank maker listed at a premium of 44% to its IPO price of 660 rupees per share. The issue was subscribed over 60 times during its IPO on the back of robust demand from high net worth individuals and qualified institutional buyers.
In the corporate journey of the company, we are grateful to our host BSC, members of the board.
And shares of Z Entertainment perked up in trade today. This after the company informed exchanges that Sony will enter into negotiations for extending the timeline of their merger. The deadline for the completion of the $10 billion merger ends today. Manglam Malu is joining us now with more details. Manglam, how much time can Z be allowed? How much time will Z be seeking?
Well, when a story like this happens, there are a lot of details that come about as well. And now the latest that we get is that in the current contract already, there exists a provision for existing negotiations to go beyond the deadline of December 21 for about a month in good faith. And as a result of which, this extension for a month is already in the existing contract. What is not there is the extension of the deal itself. So if there was a contract between Zee and Sony, for instance, the timeline was 2 years plus 1 month of auto extension in good faith. However, following this 1 month auto extension, there is no provision in the current contract for extension of the agreement. So that is something that will have to be heard from either of the parties on what happens beyond this 1 month. So as things stand right now, the discussions can continue well until Jan 21st, and then we'll see whether the merger itself or the deadline for the merger itself is extended or not. We've written to Zee and as well as Sony. We're awaiting response from both these parties, but this is the fresh development that we have in the Zee-Sony merger.
Right, Mangalam, thanks a lot for that. Now on to a CNBC-TV18 exclusive. Over 12% equity of AMI Organics worth over 470 crore rupees changed hands in a big block deal today. Sources tell us that Chovatia family, which is a large public shareholder, is the likely seller. Domestic mutual funds and a leading wealth management firm absorbed a big chunk of this block deal. And Pyramid Enterprises will set aside provisions for investments in alternate investment funds, which makes downstream investors in debtor companies. This comes 2 days after the Reserve Bank of India tightened rules for such holdings. The group plans to adjust over 3,100 crore rupees via capital funds or provisions. The RBI has set a 30-day deadline for regulated entities to liquidate investments in any such AIF schemes. Well, shifting focus now to the national capital, the Parliament has cleared a crucial bill that gives the government an upper hand in the appointment of the Election Commission. The bill was passed by a voice vote in the sparsely populated opposition benches. 3 more opposition MPs were suspended today for misconduct. The latest additions takes the total number of suspended Lok Sabha MPs to 100. Meanwhile, opposition leaders held a march from Parliament premises to Vijay Chowk to protest against the unprecedented suspensions.
He should come and speak in the House first, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. Instead of that, he was speaking outside, Lucknow, Varanasi, and Ahmedabad. Everywhere he is speaking. The ruling party people are disturbing the proceedings. 125, 30 people of Rajya Sabha, member of BJP, they stood and they were shouting against 10 people.
उपराष्ट्रपति महोदय का मिमिक्री, संवैधानिक पदों पे बैठे हुए व्यक्तियों के प्रति ये भाव, अब ये देश की जनता भी इनको जवाब देगी और देश का संविधान भी इनको जवाब देगा। ये किसानों का भी अपमान है, उनके समाज का भी अपमान है, संवैधानिक पदों पे बैठे हुए व्यक्तियों का अपमान है और इसका खामियाजा राहुल गांधी को और कांग्रेस को और अलायंस को भुगतना पड़ेगा।
The Delhi police has arrested 2 more persons in connection with the Parliament security breach case. One of them is an engineer from Bengaluru. The other accused is from Uttar Pradesh. The Delhi police has arrested 6 persons in this case so far. The Home Ministry has asked the Central Industrial Security Force to conduct a survey of the Parliament building for deployment. Post the survey, CISF is expected to submit a report and take over security operations from Delhi police. Diagnostic stocks surged in trade today after the government issued standard COVID-19 advisory asking states to stay alert against the new strain of the COVID virus. However, the government has not made RTPCR tests mandatory as 93% cases are home isolated, indicating mild illness. There's also no increase in the hospitalization rates. More than 20,000 Palestinians have died by Israeli strikes since early October, according to the Hamas-run Health Ministry. Israeli forces have intensified the attacks, leaving North Gaza without a functioning hospital. Meanwhile, talks in Egypt with Hamas leaders to secure a hostage exchange deal ended without results. The United Nations Security Council voted on a potential ceasefire was delayed for the 3rd time this week. President Joe Biden said that the U.S. is yet to decide on supporting or rejecting the ceasefire call. More than 100 container ships have been rerouted around the southern Africa to avoid the Suez Canal. This is to avoid the disruption caused by Houthi rebels attacking ships on the western coast of Yemen. As per shipping company Kugini and Nagel, more ships are expected to change course, adding pressure on global oil prices. Meanwhile, the United States announced a naval coalition to protect shipping in the Red Sea. While the UK said that it will be a part of this coalition, Egypt and Saudi Arabia are yet to accept. And government sources tell CNBC-TV18 that export restrictions on agri products are likely to cost Indian traders up to $5 billion. Adding to their concerns are the attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea, which could hurt exports of basmati rice. Abhimanyu Sharma now joins us with more. Abhimanyu, tell us, what are you picking up?
Well, trade restrictions on several essential items like wheat, sugar and rice may lead to a drop in exports from India worth 4 to 5 billion US dollars in the current financial year. Also, the current spate of attacks which have been mounted by the Houthi rebels located in Yemen, they may also adversely impact India's basmati exports to several Western countries, as India may have to change the route of export, and the ships which are carrying basmati rice may have to take a longer route through Africa, which is possibly going to raise the cost by 15 to 20%. This is what government sources have indicated. However, the government is hopeful that the rise in the price of basmati exports is not going to adversely impact demand of Indian basmati. On the other hand, the government is also looking to enhance the export of several fresh fruits and vegetables, for which a new sea export protocol has also been developed, in which it is going to be considered by the government to ensure that there is no spoilage of any fruits and vegetables, even as India is targeting several Western countries, including the United States of America, as far as exports of fresh fruits is concerned, particularly bananas, in which India is looking to increase the export of bananas from the current kitty of 174 million US dollars last year to over 1 billion US dollars per year in the next few years.
Right, Abhimanyu, thanks a lot for that. With that, it's time now to slip into a very short break. But coming up, after Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha clears the Telecom Bill 2023. We'll decode the key changes of the bill and its impact on with experts on the other side.
CNBC-TV18, embarking on a quarter century of excellence. CNBC-TV18, embarking on a quarter century of excellence.
Welcome back. The Rajya Sabha has today cleared the Telecom Bill that seeks to replace the Telegraph Act of 1885. This comes a day after the Lok Sabha had cleared the bill. The new law seeks to exclude OTT platforms from the scope of the bill. The bill also provides for allocation of spectrum in some cases rather than auction in every case, and also gives the government the power to take over telecom networks in case of public emergencies. For joining us now, for taking this discussion forward, I have with me Mr. Sumesh Srivastava, Senior Manager Public Policy for the Quantum Hub, as well as Mr. Sunil David, Co-Chairman of the Digital Communication Group IT Future Tech Panel. Mr. David, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Srivastava, thank you so much for being a part of this. Mr. David, I'll come to you first. The intent of the government is very clear that as far as this new bill is concerned, it is set for overhauling the regulatory framework, which is outdated, which is Victorian. The thrust, however, I'll just first address the issue of OTT players. The government says that this is a vertical legislation which seeks to regulate only telecom companies. It is not a horizontal legislation that seeks to govern various sectors. And that's the stance. OTTs are out. However, the fine print, however, has given reason for doubt. There is some definitions as far as telecommunications is concerned, some definitions regarding messages. Is that a concern, or is it very clear on paper as well as from the spirit of the legislation that OTTs are out of the scope of Telecom Bill?
Thank you, Akshit, for inviting me to join this discussion. I spent almost 25 years of my 30-year career in the telecom industry, and I've seen waves of change over the last 3 decades. So it is really refreshing to see that we finally have a Telecom Bill 2023 that is going to replace the India Telegraph Act of 1885. Now, coming to some of the salient features of the bill, Ashmit, I think it's good that the OTT part is separated out, right? I think there's a very clear distinction that this is only going to focus on carriage, and I think that is very, very important. The very important aspect of this whole bill is the fact that it's going to simplify the whole licensing regime. I think the government would be authorized to offer to give operators license to offer services. So I think the authorization piece is one very important dimension. Second thing, I think there's a very clear distinction in terms of how spectrum is going to be assigned, right? So very clear guidelines in terms of how it's going to be traded, shared, and so on and so forth. The third thing which I want to highlight, Ashmit, is the fact that the lot of focus on security, right? I think that's a very, very important dimension. Given the threats that we're seeing from a cyber landscape today, I think the fact that there is a lot of focus now on trying to ensure that users are protected, especially government now perhaps in the position to take over telecom networks in the case of emergencies. So users being protected, I think that's also a very, very important dimension. But coming to the point regarding OTTs, I think...
Sure. I think we've lost Mr. David there. We'll try to connect back to him. I think some audio difficulties there. But let me take that same question across to Mr. Srivastava as well. OTTs in or out? Government says they're out. There are some questions that have been raised, however, on social media that seems to suggest that there are certain definitions that technically could also include OTT players. Your reading of the situation?
So, Ashmit, thanks for this opportunity. So I would say in terms of the difference between the 2022 draft and the 23 draft, the explicit mention of OTT services, broadcast, email, that has been dropped from the draft of the bill. So that is leading to one interpretation that OTTs are now out of the scope of the bill. But if we look at a broader interpretation, if we look at how telecommunication is defined, if we look at how messaging is defined, there is a possibility that this can be interpreted to bring OTTs into the framework as well. Sorry. So I would say that yes, for now, based on the fact that OTTs have been dropped from the 22 draft to this draft, this could be a likely interpretation, but it still leaves the door open for the government. If they want to bring OTTs into the framework of the bill in the future, they can very easily do it. The definitions can be stretched to do that. And just to give you an example in terms of how this can be made more clearer. So, for example, South Africa has a Electronic Communications Act, which also talks about, which also has a wide definition of telecommunication, but it specifically excludes content services from the definition. So I think if the government had done something like that, if there was an exclusion, it would have been more clearer. Right now, the possibility still remains.
So there is some wiggle room there, which gives reason for perhaps a question mark. That's an interesting point that Mr. Srivastava is making. Mr. David is back with us. Mr. David, let me come back to you. One of the issues that you had raised was allocation of spectrum. Finally, there is now a statutory provision that provides that it needn't be auction in every case. There can also be allocation. And there are two key areas. Number one is for space communication. The other is for backhaul spectrum. How significant a development is this for the Indian telecom space?
I think this is a step in the right direction, Ashmit. The fact that now you can have spectrum given administratively to providers. I think it's very important from an Indian perspective to have a lot more foreign players competing in the Indian market, right? So with the spectrum now being given administratively, you're going to have perhaps Amazon, you're going to have Starlink provide satellite communication services. And this is only making sure that the consumers are going to get a better bang for the buck. You would have better quality of service being offered, right? And we are also following global norms, right? So if you just look at globally, when you look at satellite communication, spectrum has always been given administratively. I think I'm glad that we are now taking that path as far as India is concerned. And also very important, Ashmit, is that you just look at the equipment that are made, receivers, the fact that now you're going to have a common frequency bands that are going to be used, this interoperability will become far more easier now with the fact that you're going to have this whole harmonization of spectrum and spectrum being given
Interesting point that, Mr. David.
Overall good for the market, yes.
Interesting point that you're making there, Mr. David. And one aspect that has missed the headlines, of course, is that the government has also provided for allocation of backhaul spectrum connecting towers back to the core network. That has been a long-standing demand of the telecom companies as well. We're running out of time, Mr. Srivastava. I'll come to you for one closing comment on another pressing issue that in fact managed to make the headlines, which is the power that rests with the government to take over of telecom networks in case of public emergencies or natural disasters, or in cases of national security. The power rests with the government to even stop a certain class of messages from being pilfered or being shared on the telecom network. Just your reading of this power, which makes a new entry in this latest legislation, which wasn't there in the draft.
So, Ashmit, the powers themselves right now do not give me a major cause for concern till the time that we get details in the rules based on what will be the safeguards. The powers by themselves, the grounds given, they do seem to be fair. But how it will be implemented, we'll have to wait for the rules to come out. We'll have to wait for the specific safeguards to be defined. We'll have to see whether there will be administrative oversight or whether there will be judicial oversight mechanisms. So we'll have to wait and see for the rules to come out, for more operational details to come out, whether we can say this is something which is going to infringe fundamental rights, or whether this is something which is within the scope of what the government can do. So that analysis or that opinion will need to wait for more operational details to come out.
Right, Mr. Srivastava. Right, Mr. David. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. This is, of course, a lengthy bill. There are various parts of it that could merit an hour-long discussion, but that's all the time that we have. And it's a wrap on this edition of Business 360. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18, the news and updates.